Well, hey everyone, welcome to this week episode of DoD Contract Academy. We have an awesome episode for you today. We have Jeff and Melissa from Sera-Brynn. Am I saying that correctly, Jeff?
You are.
Okay.
Sera-Brynn. That's right.
And really, I think it's really appropriate to have them on here today because we've been, anyone that's been listening and most of our audience is either selling or trying to sell to the government. There's been so much talk about FedRAMP and CMMC, and we've had a mutual friend on with Corinne Wise on talking about CMMC, and she told me, she's like, "Hey, there is nobody that knows more about FedRAMP than Jeff Farr and his team." So we had to have you on to talk FedRAMP, talk about what you guys do. So thanks for coming on the show today.
We're honored to be here, and Corinne is fantastic, and just absolutely love what she brings. She's really one of the good ones.
Yeah, no doubt about that. So why don't we start off? You have a business called Sera-Brynn, and the audience at this point at least knows you do something with FedRAMP and CMMC. They're probably guessing cybersecurity. If we could maybe start off with a brief overview of what does Sera-Brynn do? What is your expertise? And, as we help companies sell to the government, maybe how you maybe focus that towards what you do for companies selling to the government.
Sure. So Sera-Brynn was founded roughly 14 years ago. Former military, specifically Air Force, some Navy. Those guys, and then of course the natural routine, they end up in the intelligence agencies, and then after that it was, hey, it's time to start a cyber company. And so Sera-Brynn was formed, and over the last 14 years, really built up a very nice clientele, a very good reputation in the space. And so it was started by a guy named Rob and a couple other guys, Sam and John. These guys did a good job building the foundation. About a year ago, I purchased Sera-Brynn. And so I come from, big enterprise IT and cyber and compliance background. And, they wanted to focus on a product, but I wanted the services side. So I bought that. And so Sera-Brynn, we're based out of Chesapeake, Virginia. And there's two sides of our business. There's the cybersecurity side, and then there's the compliance side. Mm-hmm. We'll start with the cyber side. It is what you would normally think, kind of outsourcing cybersecurity, CISO services. We do incident response, so critical incident response when somebody gets hacked, ransomware, whatever. Digital forensics, expert testimony, penetration testing. Mm. So, a full true cyber security company on that side. On the compliance side, we're heavy in CMMC, which is getting a lot of press, of course, right now, and something that Corinne works with a lot. And then FedRAMP, we're a 3PAO for FedRAMP, and that's a third-party assessor organization, mm-hmm. On behalf of the U.S. government. And then we're also PCI assessors, so that's the pen card information industry. And then we do work around compliance, whether it be, FISMA or ISO or NIST or, several others, Graham Leach Bliley, a bunch of them, HIPAA. Mm-hmm. So we really do have a strong, two strong sides of our business, both the compliance side and the cyber side.
Okay.
And that's really in a nutshell, that's what we do.
Now, are your clients mainly then companies? Or is it mainly a B2B business, or do you work with the government at all? Outside,
we do work
certified.
We work with the government. We work with the government, a little bit. I wouldn't call us a heavy contractor. We work mostly with contractors who contract with the government.
Okay.
So, like in the CMMC world, right? These are we'll work with some of the primes, but in general, we're working with the subcontractors to help them get compliant, help them just get a better, um, you know, profile. So that's really, I would say most of it is in commercial, and I'd give it maybe 10 or 15% is government.
Okay, gotcha. And then, so that's what your business does. Let's go back a little bit though. So I'm always interested in kind of where you came from, and you mentioned the Air Force.
Sure.
And that's where I spent quite a bit of time. What did you do in the Air Force?
I wasn't military. I'm not for military. My guys, all my guys are.
Oh,
And
okay.
so, yeah, they sort of let me in the club a little bit, sort of, it's a, that's a fraternity right there. And,
Sure.
um, but, you know, the, the business was founded by former military, and we still have several, that are closely associated. We try to do the skills bridge. We're, uh, big supporters. But no, I didn't have the opportunity to do that. I'm not sure that I could have conformed enough. They probably would have kicked me out in like the second day.
Oh, I doubt
Uh,
it. I doubt it.
yeah,
You'd be
but
surprised.
I
Well,
was
go ahead.
I always have big respect for the people who serve, and it's just um, it. I wish we had my grandfather served, and from that generation to now, we just have a different attitude in the country that I wish we'd go back to.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. I know very well what you're talking about there. Well, let's start. I'd like to know a little bit about you. So, where did you grow up? Where did you kind
Sure.
of cut your teeth prior to, as far as your
Yeah.
career before Sarah-Brynn?
So I grew up in Texas, so I'm a big Texan, big boy, 6'7". So
Oh, that is big boy.
that's a big boy, and so I didn't miss a meal ever. Um, Still haven't missed a meal, unfortunately. But I grew up in Mesquite, Texas, which is outside of Dallas, and all my life I spent a little bit of time in Florida, a little bit of time in Colorado, but in general, I'm a Texas guy. And when I came out of school, I went to Texas A&M,
Okay,
and when I
you're an
when
Aggie.
I came out, yeah, Maggie, which don't hold that too much against me. We're a cult too. Um, but when I came out of school, it was I went into technology, and I worked for EDS and you know SAP and Ernst and Young, and so it was in big IT consulting was my where I cut my teeth,
Right.
and not too long after that, I'd call it the middle part of my career, my father and I started a consulting firm out of Dallas called Farr Group. My dad had a big reputation in the IT world, and basically our clients were the biggest companies on the planet. The Burlington Northerns, the Dr. Peppers, American Airlines, Southwest Airlines, Interstate Batteries. You get the point. Big,
Yep, very
big
interesting. Yeah.
IT. Yeah, and we did a lot of IT strategy. It was a lot about how you run a department, how you find good people, how do you get funded. CIOs struggle with how do you get a seat at the table on the executive table and not get kicked out.
Sure.
And so we had a good run. We ran for about 13 years, um, and then I got introduced to what I would call small and medium sized business IT. I had a private equity friend call and say, "Hey, we've got this investment. I think it's going down the toilet, and can you go just look at it?" So I said, "Oh, I don't know anything about small IT. What am I going to do?" Right. So I drive out there, East Texas, and sure enough, even small businesses need all the same stuff the big businesses need. They just need it in a much smaller quantity.
Right.
And I was really intrigued by that. Like, there was some real sophistication down there, and I was expecting a bunch of dummies. So I was hooked, and so I spent 3 years with that company, turning them around, and really grew them. And then we grew them and sold them to a bigger private equity. And I went to work for a much bigger managed service provider. Um, Same thing. Spent a couple years there, turned them around. Um, And then I got into, it was a heavy cyber company. Then I got into compliance when CMMC was really starting to, it was a baby, but it was getting some momentum.
Sure.
And I had a heavy security background. So a friend of mine, who's a broker, business broker, calls and says, "Hey, I've got this business. It's an odd duck. It's cyber and compliance and these things. And you're one of the only guys I can think of that this would make sense." We hit it off. I bought the business, and we're going to triple this year. So we're just blowing and going.
Wow, that is awesome. There's a ton I want to ask you about, but I don't want to skip ahead here because anyone that's watching this on YouTube will know there's a third person on. Lisa's on here. Lisa, maybe you could just introduce yourself really quickly, just so we can and 'cause I can see that you have a great team, Jeff, and I know you've been keeping me in check also, Lisa, to make sure that this episode took place when it was supposed to. So maybe we could introduce you as well.
Yes, sir. My name is Lisa Hottie, and I am the client success manager. I kind of just follow Jeff around. I actually worked with him at one of the first MSPs that he came to, and when he started with Sera-Brynn and took it over, I gladly jumped on board with him. So
Wow.
I've been in the MSP in this space about 8 years now, and learned a ton. But I love it.
Well, that's a good sign that you followed him over there. And I can see why you're so successful, just because you are very persistent and you have your ducks in a row. So I think that speaks a lot about your business. And so I just wanted to make sure everyone knew who we were dealing with on the call today. So maybe we could get into a couple things in case we have listeners that aren't familiar with CMMC and FedRAMP. Maybe we could get an overview of what it is and kind of where we are today with that.
Sure. Let's start with FedRAMP,
Okay.
the bigger one. Right? So, if you're a business and you have decided that you've gotten into the cloud space, so you sell a cloud product. So I'm going to use something like Zoom, because most people know what Zoom is, right? That is a cloud-based product. And let's say Zoom has decided they want to sell to one of anybody in the federal government. So they're going to sell to the Department of Energy, for instance, right? The Department of Energy cannot buy that product unless that cloud product has achieved a certain level of FedRAMP certification. There's low, moderate, and high. Most people are FedRAMP moderate. That's the most common. So Zoom has to go through a process where they go through for moderate, it's about 325 security controls, and they put that in place. The Department of Energy will sponsor them and say, "Hey, we need this product. The government needs it." And then they will call in a third-party assessor organization like Sera-Brynn, and then we would do essentially their assessment on behalf of the federal government, and we would either say, "Okay, they meet these controls, or they don't, or they're close, and these are what they're missing. Is that an acceptable risk?" and so forth. Okay. So think of it like a financial audit. Like you have CPAs that do auditing, and so it's kind of that's the best parallel I can come up with, really.
That's interesting. So the three PAOs that you're talking, the third party assessors, which I know they have them for CMMC as well. That means that the government has actually vetted your business, and certified you to do that.
That's right.
That assessment.
Very rigorous process. It is. There's an extensive amount of money and time that goes into that certification. And as you said, we're doing this on behalf of the federal government. And each year we have to, recertify. If you're not doing the right things, you can be put into remediation. If you don't remediate, then you can be taken off the list. There's literally a federal marketplace, a FedRAMP marketplace that lists. I think right now there's 39 FedRAMP assessors in the country.
Oh, it's not a lot.
Not a lot. And so, that number goes up and down. There are some of the bigger players in that space, but it's a very important function that if our federal government is going to put sensitive data in a piece of software, then that data needs to be protected.
Absolutely.
And that's what the FedRAMP program is really designed for.
Absolutely. And it's I could tell over the years, this has got a lot more momentum. I retired in 2019 and, I was familiar with what we were doing then. And I've talked kind of ad nauseum about the problem with putting a company on contract from the government's point of view and then not being able to get an ATO because they don't meet the security requirements. And there's a lot that goes into that. But one question that always comes up with my clients, for instance, is hey, I want to get FedRAMP certified, but what does it mean to get a government sponsor? Does that mean I need to win a contract first, or will the government sponsor me before I have a contract so I can get the certification?
Great question. So there's really two ways to go about this, right? If let's say that the Department of Energy needs a very specific product that's really for them, right? Something to do with energy, and it doesn't have broad appeal. So in other words, the Army's not going to be interested, the IRS is not interested, then that is an agency ATO, authority to operate. And that's really a one-to-one situation where you're not looking for a broad certification called a JAB, right? And so if you get a JAB, then you're more like what Zoom would be, which is several agencies would be interested. So those are two different processes. One, if you're going directly to an agency, they will sponsor you. Oftentimes you can put your product in with a provisional. You can go a certain period of time, and then you have to go through the formal process. Flip side, let's talk about somebody who has broad appeal, and you want to be FedRAMP certified so that you can sell to 30 agencies. That process, you have to be approved. There's roughly 10 to 12 products that are approved a year. And so the FedRAMP program is constantly looking for who do we need, right? More than just who do we want.
Okay.
And so if there's a technology that really has broad appeal, they will move that up the list so that it can be, so that it can go through the FedRAMP process and be approved.
Okay. So if I have a product then that is so when I go to FedRAMP, I can look and I can see that there are companies listed in there that have FedRAMP moderate. So I'm assuming that those are the companies that are approved to sell to all the agencies that have the broad appeal. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. And so you'll see in there, if it says FedRAMP authorized, then you know what that has. Oftentimes, if it's just for an agency, you won't necessarily see that in the marketplace.
Okay, interesting. So you won't even see it on there, but can they still be FedRAMP certified if they're not in that
It's
just
a
in that agency?
How would I call it? It's a FedRAMP process, but it's just a different ATO.
Okay, gotcha. I've also heard, and I've been asked about a FedRAMP equivalency. Like you're not FedRAMP certified, but if you're not on contract, you can get an equivalent certification.
So we get a lot of those calls actually, and so the situation is. So I don't know if your audience understands the term CUI or controlled and classified information. I don't
Probably
know
worth talking about because it's PII, they are classified, but CUIs. I don't want to say it's new, but it's getting a lot of press, right? So
yes, a lot of press, been around for a few years. The National Archives is in charge of classifying CUI from the categorization and so forth. But CUI is, if you think about the classification system, top secret, secret, so forth, then below that, unclassified data that still needs to be controlled, right? And so CUI. So I'll give you an example. The blueprints of an Army base. Okay, is that top secret? No. Is it because you can do an aerial and you can see, but you don't really want that on the internet either. Right. So that's one of those pieces of data that you need it to be controlled, but it's not really top secret or secret. So in that situation, CUI is the is the common denominator that determines whether or not a particular software system is in scope.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if somebody says, I think I need, we'll get a call, somebody will say, I think we need to be FedRAMP. Okay, tell me why, and they'll explain. And then I'll ask them, do you have CUI data? Are you in control of that? And is it in that system? And they say, well, no, not really. So what we do in that situation is we do a FedRAMP moderate equivalency, but it's not really required.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of we're going to this level, but we're not going through the FedRAMP official process.
Right. Well, it's if you're approaching the government, so I'm more on the BD sales side of things, right? But the government's first question a lot of times these days is, are you Fed? If you have a software tool that's going to be in the cloud, are you FedRAMP? Or they might say, are you Platform One? Or, there's some other, each service has, specific things. But what they're really looking for is they want to have confidence that if they are working with your business, that they can actually use the product, right? So
100%.
If you're not, and CMMC is another thing that they might ask about. But so I look at that equivalency as, hey, no, we're not in the FedRAMP system. Maybe they're not on contract, but if there's a company that's trying to sell to the government, that might be something they can do to build a lot of confidence on their end. It's almost a marketing tool.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, the FedRAMP is access to a marketplace. It is completely new, the ability to sell to a new marketplace, right? So what you just said is important. The other thing that is maybe of note is that oftentimes people don't understand FedRAMP is based on NIST 800-53 special publication. So NIST 800-53 is what the federal government uses to protect their systems internally to the government. And then those controls have then been put into the FedRAMP program. And that's where you get people outside of the government needing to meet those levels. To take that one step further, you get into CMMC, which is Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. Very new. That is based on NIST 800-171, which, by the way, is based on 853. So if you get the point of you kind of set of rules and then you have all these derivatives, basically.
You for anyone listening, could you give an example of maybe just a couple of the different types of controls that are found in, let's say, NIST 853? Sure. And maybe if they're the same as CMMC, it'd be interesting to hear how they are.
Yeah. CMMC, which is based on 800-171, takes its controls from 53. Okay, so those are, you'll find a one-to-one. So, different families of controls, access control, right? I mean, something like, do you have multi-factor authentication? That's a pretty simple one, right? Mm-hmm. What level of password? Is it complex? Is it not? There's incident response controls. Do you have an incident response plan? Do you have someone who handles those? Are they investigated? And then how do you remediate them, right? So all of those controls, if you really looked at them, they're common sense. I mean, these are things that most businesses and certainly governments need to be doing.
Right.
It's just really somebody flat put it in a program and said, okay, now we've got a checklist, right? And of course, everything has nuance. Mm-hmm. So, for example, let's take MFA, which multi-factor authentication, most people know what that is nowadays. And I get this all the time. We'll say, do you have multi-factor? And they'll say, yes. I'll say, okay. On email? They'll say, yes. How about VPN? No. Okay. What about on your cloud services? Some of them. Okay. So, not all the time is it just a yes, no. It is, you have to dig in and really understand their environment.
Right.
Also, there's different types of MFA. So, are you using a cell phone with a text, code that's been texted to you that's actually wide open? Or are you using an authenticator application? So even though these controls, at first glance look like a yes, no.
Mm-hmm.
There's really actually a lot of nuance in them.
Okay, interesting. And that makes sense. That makes sense. One thing I want to just double back to CUI for a minute, because, and again, I'm kind of giving you some of the client questions I get that, I either don't have an answer for, or that I had to spend time researching, and I think might help. This is one of them, which I think I know the answer to, but I think might help the audience, which is, I'll have people come in so there's a FedRAMP certification that is the lowest one. I don't remember what it's called. It's just called low. Well, hey, there you go. Right. That makes sense. And they were being asked to go to FedRAMP moderate. And their explanation to me was, hey, look, we don't need to be moderate because we don't have CUI. But then I believe there's a place we can go to check and see what actually does classify as CUI information. And I think some companies might be surprised at some of the things that are listed there. Is there anything that comes to mind for you that you immediately go to see, hey, here's some, or maybe some types of information that companies don't think is CUI but actually is?
Yeah, a lot of times. So let's talk about. Let me take it up a level and really understand the CUI and the ownership of CUI. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the federal government, they see CUI data as their data, and that they are handing it to either a contractor or a subcontractor. And think of that as like a bag of gold. It has to be protected. It is not yours to own. It is yours to use. So if I take this data and I give it to a prime contractor, Northrop Grumman, right, and then Northrop Grumman is going to distribute it to 50 subcontractors, and that data moves down, all of that data is considered federal data, and you have the responsibility to not only protect it but to prove that you have taken ownership and you have been a good steward of that data, and you have not let it.
Right.
Okay. So with that concept of CUI, I just went down a rabbit hole and totally forgot what you asked me.
But that's actually a really good overview of CUI. It's not really a way that I've thought about it either, which is everything that the government gives you is their data, right? So even if a company takes it and thinks, oh, it's just an email address, or it's just in the case I was talking about, oh, it's just statistical data, that's not something that needs to be protected at a certain level. They may be wrong about that, or it might be the combination of different types of data, but it's all federal data.
It's all federal data, and you have been entrusted with it, and they expect you to and if you really want to go up a level and think about, okay, people, especially the smaller businesses where this is a very large expense and lift for them, why are we doing this, right? And the reality is, I hate to just be blunt, but it's China. China basically has copied almost all of our weapons. Their carrier looks like our carrier, right? And they've made it actually better. They did it half the money and half the time. It's an unfair advantage. And China didn't go steal those. It didn't go steal a carrier from the Navy, and they didn't go steal it from one of the prime contractors. They went down to the mom and pop shops, Joe's Tool and Die, and he's got a blueprint sitting on a card table next to the lathe, making the barrel of the tank.
Right.
And there's absolutely no, he's probably got 10 employees. He's in some rural town. He doesn't even know China exists, and it's very easy to steal it. They take all that data, they reverse engineer it. Next thing you know, they're copying all our weapons. So ultimately, at some point, you have to stop that, right? Because then it becomes, we're losing that particular part of what I'm going to call kind of a Cold War.
Sure.
That's probably too strong, but you get the word, you get the idea. But anyway, that was the impetus for the DoD to say, okay, several years ago, we told everybody with DFARS 7012 that you have to start thinking about NIST 800-171. You have to put these controls in place.
Yeah. And by the
Well,
way, just for everyone listening, this is a good point and a question I get a lot, which is FedRAMP. When I think FedRAMP, I think cloud-based software tools, essentially, or SaaS
right.
products that are going to be in the cloud. But some people think CMMC is related just to technology or software, but I don't believe that's the case. Is it? And does it apply to everybody? Who needs to be thinking about CMMC and NIST 800-171?
So the way you think about CMMC is you go back to the data. Okay. So whenever I get a phone call and they say, okay, they've told me that we're going to have to, we get a letter from our prime contractor, right? Lockheed has sent me a letter and they want to know what our status is. And there's something called a SPRS score, SPRS score. That is when somebody has looked at NIST 800-171 and they have determined a score, which is a very odd score. It's the best score is a positive 110. The worst score is a negative 203. So and I'm not sure who came up with that system, but that was bad. So anyway, you put that score into the SPRS system for the government to understand that you have where you stand on these controls. The problem is that it was self-attestation.
So they were doing it themselves.
Self-attestation does not work.
Right.
So eventually, the DoD said, okay, since you're not doing it, we're going to create CMMC, and you're going to have to get certified. And we're going to have 3 PAOs that are going to come look, and we're going to validate that you're hitting one of the 3 levels of CMMC. There's level 1, level 2, and level 3. So, anyway, we're back to the data is what matters when
Gotcha.
when you come in and you have CUI in your environment. For example, somebody emails you a piece of data that's considered CUI. All of a sudden, your email system is in boundary. It's in scope. Susie takes it out of email and she puts it into Dropbox. Guess what? Dropbox is now in scope. So if you follow that data through that company, everything it touches, it's now in scope.
That is interesting. So let me ask you this, right? Just let me put it in a different context. How about I'm a construction company and the government sends me some plans or, those the architectural design for the new building that's on base. It's not classified, but that may now count as CUI.
It absolutely is.
So that
100%.
means my email system needs to abide by.
Now you pulled your email system into scope. So what we tend to do with our clients when we're not on the assessor side, if we're on the get you ready side, readiness consulting, what we're going to do is first do a data flow. Where is this stuff coming from? Where is it going? Both at rest and in transit.
Right.
And then what we're going to do is we're going to say, does it really have to come into email? Like, is that required? And they may say, well, what else would we do? I said, well, what if we have them put it into BoxGov? Just have them put it into a folder that's already FedRAMP moderate, bypass email. And if they say, well, that process will work just fine. Now we've taken one system out of scope and we're starting to shrink our environment. And so what you want to do is you want to get it down to the smallest environment you can. One mitigating factor. When I first talk to someone, and one of the first questions I ask is, how many contracts do you have that have CUI? That would fall in that category. And if they say 1 or 2, then that's one thing. If they say I've got 20, then if you have 20, most of the time your entire organization is going to be affected. There's too much going on. But if I get a company and they call and they say, look, I've got 2 contracts, then I'll say, okay, how much money are those contracts worth to you? And they'll say, hey, $100,000 a year. I'm like, okay, you're going to spend $100,000 to $200,000 getting CMMC certified. So are those contracts actually worth it anymore?
Right.
right? Do you even want to be in this game? Because if you do, you're going to have to invest. And so, so there's a lot of nuance in those initial conversations about how much data, how many contracts, how many systems, how complicated, how long have you been doing it? And I'll even give you one more piece of data. Is this particular part single source or multiple? You have multiple source. If you're the only person who makes a thing,
mm-hmm.
you have a lot more leverage to say, no, I'm not going to do this. The prime contractor is going to come back and say, wait a minute, I've got $1 billion contract that's going to be held up on you. No. And they're going to send somebody to help them fix it. If you're one of 7 guys who make a part, then you're out. I mean, it's a competitive advantage for the guys who are willing to do it. So when you really get into it, how it actually operates, it gets super interesting on the decisions that a business has to weigh and whether or not this is worth their time and energy.
Sure. When is CMMC going to be required for the certification? Because there's different levels, right? There's the self-assessment, which we're seeing now. I've had clients recently that are on contract with the government, have multi-million-dollar IDIQs, and the contracting officer this is an example that I worked with Corinne on, and it was, hey, we're not putting another delivery order on this contract until you get your self-assessment score into SPRS. I want your security plan, and I want your POAMs and everything else associated with it. We're going to review all of that. That's not something that we've been seeing in the past, and this is coming to already on contract.
Yeah, you're starting to see it in. Now, remember, what they can do now is they can ask anything about NIST 800-171. So the SPR score is about NIST.
Mm-hmm.
They can't do CMMC specifically. You cannot go into contract yet because the final rule has not been issued. Right. We don't anticipate that till late in the year or early next year.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that the contractor can't come back and say, wait a minute, I want to know what your posture is on what you're supposed to be doing now. Right. And so I want a SPR score. What is it? And if it's, negative 42 or negative 142, then, okay, now where is your POAM, plan of action and milestones? So show me what you're doing to fix that.
Right.
So back to the system security plan, which is a key component of CMMC, and then the POAM being another key component. An agency can say, well, I get it, you're sitting at negative 40, but according to your POAM in the next 6 months, you should be much closer to 110. That may be acceptable for them as long as you're executing on that.
Sure.
Right. So right now, each agency has some control. Some of the agencies are much more rigid, right? You don't have a SPR score, I'm not paying your invoice. I've had plenty of those calls. They've been paying my invoice. All of a sudden, they just told me they won't pay it. And I've got to have something called a SPR score. What's that?
We're seeing
you got to read
risk
the contracts.
There's always risk aversion on the government acquisitions core for the most part. But I think we're seeing some I'm sensing some scared contracting officers that, maybe have let things go, starting to realize things are, chickens are coming home to roost, so to speak. And the CMMC, how is that going to change this? Because this is just a self-assessment. What changes if CMMC goes through?
When then it becomes a contractual item, so you can't bid. You can't even bid. So, and by the way, it's not even you can't bid. They can put it in the renewal, so you can't even renew. So as of right now, they can't keep that part. They can hold you on NIST as long as you're self-assessing and you're improving. But the minute CMMC becomes rule, now they can actually exclude you, right? And so you just had said something. I thought I was going to add something, but I've lost it already. But we'll come back.
Okay. And I'm not sure what were we saying. We were talking about CUI. We're talking about companies in the CMMC ruling. Companies getting. I was talking about a contractor that had a contract, and you just mentioned it also, where they weren't going to give him any more delivery orders until he got that NIST score in the system.
Looking by the invoices, getting those that's super interesting and new. But yeah, it'll come back to me.
This makes it, and I like to vector things back towards small, medium-sized businesses, which is where I like to focus, and that's where on the government side, that's first of all, that's where I saw the best technologies coming from, but it's also where I saw the biggest struggle selling to the government. We see year over year, we see fewer and fewer small businesses selling to the government. It's less than half of 1% of U.S. small businesses that are selling right now to the government. And this sounds like it's going to make it even harder for those companies. So if you're talking to me, I have a service disabled veteran-owned small business. And if you tell me I have to spend a couple $100,000 just to get the certifications needed to be able to bid on something, you talked about, hey, is the juice worth the squeeze? Well, something's got to pay for that, right? And if I can't even get a government contract, and there's no guarantee, government contracting is hard anyway. Right. It takes a long time. So what would your advice be to a small business that's looking to get in the game?
Yeah, that's a great question, man, because I get it so much. Basically, you really have to take two perspectives. One, if I get this, then that is a competitive. The sooner I get it, the faster I get it, the more I'm ready and the faster I'm ready. I am going to move up in the line in those contracts, right? So it's a competitive advantage if you're going to go for it. If you don't, if you are dabbling, and I get a lot of calls where they have one or two contracts and that's it. Those guys are going away. The minute you do a cost justification analysis, this is over. Because, there's all kinds of numbers out there that say, oh, well, you can do it this way and it's only $40,000. Not true. This is $100,000 to $200,000 minimum process. It just is. And then the more locations, the bigger you are, the more expensive it is.
Sure.
So I think that what you're going to find is it's actually going to thin out the subcontractor pool. It's not what the DoD wanted, but ultimately that's what's going to end up happening.
Yeah.
There was CMMC level, basically version 1, and that ended, I don't know what, last year, kind of mid last year. And one of the reasons was that basically they just had too many small businesses that just said, peace out, not doing it. So kind of rebranded, regrouped, came up with CMMC level 2, supposedly going to be easier. Not any easier, by the way. And in reality, I'm not sure they moved the needle that much.
Yeah.
Right. But they did have, in my opinion, totally my opinion, I think they had a PR nightmare on their hands. They can't go lose 60 or 70% of your subcontractors when you implement something like that. That just won't work.
Yeah, so it's a weird conundrum, right? Because it's, on the one hand, you have to protect the data. We've got things happening just here in Massachusetts. We had some kid walk out of a skiff and started posting stuff on his video game channel, right? And right. That covers a lot of things beyond what we're talking about here. But you have to protect the data and protect the country. And on the other hand, we don't want to create an environment where, and you could already make the argument that the massive amount of spending that the government is responsible for. They're the number one purchaser of goods and services in the world. We in the Small Business Association has been complaining about the fact that fewer and fewer businesses have been selling. This is going to make it even worse, even harder, right? So you got these two things that don't necessarily align with each other. They work the opposite of each other, actually.
It's true. And, it's like you said, it's a true conundrum because we have to start protecting this stuff.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we're making it harder for smaller businesses where the margins are pretty thin anyway.
Mm-hmm. So
then the question I get all the time is, okay, will the government pay for it? And the answer from the federal government is technically, the DoD is technically yes, but in reality, it means it doesn't translate. And I'll tell you what I mean. Yes, you can put certain CMMC costs into your bid, but your bid goes up. And if the other ones don't do it, it's a disadvantage. Yeah. So in reality, you can do it if you're single source, but you can't do it if you're in a competitive situation. So that part didn't translate and didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you another one. I'm going to flip back over to the FedRAMP side real quick. In the FedRAMP marketplace, we find this. It lists how many different products that you have currently, you're the assessor on. And so agencies will go out there and look, and they'll say, Coal Fire is one of the biggest players in the FedRAMP space. At one time on the marketplace, they had 500 products or something. It was just huge. As of like yesterday, they had 100. Right, so it goes up and down for various reasons. Well, the small guys, we're considered a small guy. If we have 0 or 1 or 2, then the agencies will look and say, well, I'm not sure they're as qualified as the guys who have done 100 or 200. And so once again, it's back to, we spent an enormous amount of time and money, and then we have to answer these questions about, well, are they really qualified? The White House Office of Management and Budget, max.gov, we did that FedRAMP. So if we can do a FedRAMP for the White House, I think we can probably do, we're qualified.
Sure.
And yet we still, because we're small, have to kind of fight, that thing. And what it does is it drives the small businesses out of that marketplace.
Yeah.
Unintended consequences.
It is hard. And I could talk about this for the next 3 hours because I have some thoughts, different types of businesses, different industries. How do we minimize the footprint? Because it sounds like you have some pretty specific thoughts on what we can do to at least make it, depending on the type of business, we may be able to use, like you said, there's some maybe some tools out there where you're storing information in a protected cloud environment. So now you don't have to, maybe put measures on your computer. So I don't want to give the impression to everyone out there that there's no hope, because I think there is hope. And I think even beyond that, right? I think you'd agree, there's an amazingly big opportunity out here, but you've got to take precautions. You got to approach things with your eyes wide open. And I would hate to see companies wasting time or money, going after something, getting their whole federal team put together, and then not realizing that this piece is here and it's real and it needs to be taken care of.
In the end, I tell people this, remember when HIPAA kind of came out and it was starting and it stuttered and it finally, I really see CMMC the same way. Yes, there's all kinds of hiccups, but this is not going away. This will absolutely happen. We can't not do it.
Right.
So, I think in 5 years, we're all going to look back and say, oh, you remember that CMMC crud, and then it'll be just like putting your seatbelt on. You just do it.
Right.
The playing field will level. So back to your point of, this is the positive side of this. It's critical that we make it happen. Businesses are starting to not only get this pressure from the DoD, what we're seeing is their insurance companies are now pushing them. Oh, you don't have MFA. Oh, you don't have your backups offsite. Oh, you're not doing, you don't have some kind of detection tool. You're not doing vulnerability management. And so they'll either won't insure them, or their cyber insurance just skyrockets.
Right.
So it's not just the DoD saying, hey, you got to do these things. In general, I have several clients call and say, look, my biggest customer has just asked me to fill out a cybersecurity form. So when your customers start pushing on you, and the insurance starts pushing on you, and the marketplace pushes on you, we're all going there.
Yep. No question about it. Is it, and then we're going to have to wrap up here in a minute, but I just wanted to, because you mentioned the DoD specifically, is this applying to all federal agencies across the board?
Yeah. You're seeing across the board the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which is the FTC safeguards, that affects the biggest ones, all the car dealerships, non-banking financial institutions. We're getting tons of those calls because they're basically saying, put in these controls. The SEC is coming out with their version. So there's really not a federal agency. They're all doing some version of this in different various ways. By the way, it's all based on NIST usually 853.
Gotcha.
Because we all go back to the same. I mean, that's really the standard for this space. But this is pervasive, and this genie will never go back in the bottle. It has to happen. And so it's really about how do you get your head right about how do I do this logically, constructively? How do I budget for it? If I need to make an investment in my business, where am I going to get that money, and how am I going to make that really pay off for me?
Okay.
Those are the business conversations that have to be had.
So let me ask you this in the last couple of minutes here. Let's take two different kinds of business, and we're just going to focus on small and medium-sized companies. We've got companies that are selling to the government already. They're on contract, and they're hearing this, and they probably know it a little bit, but they want to talk to you. Like, what do you think are the next steps? And how would they work with you? And then also, same question for the small business that is just registering their company and they want to get started. Maybe now they're double thinking or getting a second guessing their thought to get into government contracting.
But for the one that's already there, especially if you've got a decent amount of revenue, right? If you're doing $500,000 or more in revenue, then this is worth doing, right? Then I don't care how small you are, and it'll also strengthen your position in the market because there will be people that fall off. So my advice to them: embrace this, hit the gas, get a great consultant to help you do it smart. Don't just get somebody who wants you to write a huge check. There's a lot of those guys out there. Get somebody who's actually trying to help you make good business decisions in this space. If you're on the other side and you're thinking about getting into this, I think it's just understand. It's just barrier to entry, right? It's just think about what, like any other, if you're going to be a cosmetologist or a person who does hair, you got to go get your license. You got to pay your fees. It's part of it. And so as long as you know it up front and it still has a strong business case for you, then it's like any other obstacle. Just
Gotcha.
Get around.
Could still make a lot of sense. I agree. What's the best way for them to reach out to you if they want to talk, if they want to schedule a consult? What's the process?
Sera-Brynn.com, which is SERABRYNN. So Sera-Brynn.com. And there's all kinds of, contact us for this, forms and on that. It's that's probably the easiest way to get in touch with us. And, we love to, especially the small, medium-sized business. Those are our favorites. I don't know why we've got a soft spot for them. We have big enterprise clients and they're great, but maybe because, I love that world, but, that's just fun to me.
Yeah, no, same here. Well, Jeff, Lisa, this has got to be the best FedRAMP discussion we've ever had on the podcast. We've had over 100 interviews, 100 episodes on here, and this has been great. I learned a lot. I'm sure our audience learned a lot. And hey, guys, if you're listening to this, now how to reach Jeff and Lisa at Sera-Brynn. Go to the website, check them out, and set yourself up for success. I think that they could do a lot to help you. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a recommendation, and anything you want to hear, let us know, and we'll have somebody on that can talk about what you want to hear about for federal government contracting. Thanks again, Jeff and Lisa.
Thank you.
Thanks.